It was their mission to teach students how to think, and in doing so it was considered natural to use as teaching guides, as Matthew Arnold, philosopher, put it, the best which has been thought and said in our culture. For the last 40 years, universities have considered it their mission to teach students what to think, and our Western civilization's cultural canon is the last place to look for the content they wish to convey. Professionals like doctors and engineers are being turned out still without real problems, and actually they are the majority of professionals, are the majority of students at a university. The crisis is in the liberal arts. They are not numerous in campus. I think in the US they are 1 in 10 of all the students that graduate. But the liberal arts are as indispensable to the university as the keystone is to an arch. They give a sense of purpose and higher meaning to what would otherwise be a bundle of discrete professional or vocational programs. Because of their disproportionate importance within the university and society itself, any wavering of their sense of purpose is of more than academic interest. In the 1970s, the old model collapsed and students would no longer master a specific body of knowledge, but instead a variety of critical approaches that would teach them to, quote, learn to learn. What counts most is knowledge that, quote, exposes the contingency of present arrangements. If you want to see an encapsulation of the sense of purpose, you have to look to, and by the way, I sometimes use American examples and Canadian, but trust me, it's all the same. Sometimes it's more exaggerated in some places in the US than others, but the basic thinking in the West is all the same. So we look, for instance, to the University of Minnesota's College of Education and Human Development's recent report tabled by its Race, Culture, Class, and Gender Task Group. The core section of the report is entitled, "What Successful Beginning Teachers Need to Know and How to Assess and How to Teach Them." The first point is, quote, "Future teachers will understand themselves as beings who position themselves and are positioned by others in relation to dimensions of difference, like racial, social class, and gender, and other hierarchies in school and society." Some of the key points include the proposal that, quote, "Teacher education should redesign students to adopt race, culture, class, and gender identity politics in order to be recommended for a teaching license." In other words, if you do not embody this role model of an activist, basically, you should not be granted a teaching license. The plan includes 14 outcomes all prospective teachers would have to meet, as well as assessment methods to assure they had achieved the outcomes. The first outcome is typical. Future teachers will be able to discuss their own histories and current thinking, drawing on notions of white privilege, hegemonic masculinity, heteronormativity, and internalized oppression. I know, it sounds like a skit, but it's real. Other highlights. Yes, other highlights. Future teachers will understand that they are privileged and marginalized depending on context. In other words, if you're a black teacher, you're marginalized. If you're a white teacher, you're privileged. Future teachers will recognize and demonstrate an understanding of white privilege. Future teachers are able to explain how institutional racism works in schools. So this is a guideline for how teachers should be assessed in order to be hired. And if they don't meet these standards, they won't be hired. And students must become activists. Sorry, this is a quote. "Students must not only demonstrate changed thinking, they must become activists. They must learn that schools are critical sites for social and cultural transformation." One outcome reads, "Future teachers create and fight for social justice, even if it's just in their classroom." So it goes on, and this report does issue from an American university, but as I say, the principles it embodies are exactly the same for all Western educational ideologues, and there is no sentiment expressed here that would not find its ideological echo in OISE. In a word, the universities, formerly independent custodians of objective knowledge, governed by the rubric of free academic inquiry, have become politicized engines of social change. Intellectual investigation has been subordinated to non-intellectual and even anti-intellectual imperatives. A famous philosopher, Leszek Kolakowski, said, "What are universities for?" And he says, "The greatest danger is the invasion of an intellectual fashion which wants to abolish cognitive criteria of knowledge and truth itself. The humanities and social sciences have always succumbed to various fashions, and this seems inevitable. But this is probably the first time that we are dealing with a fashion, or rather fashions, according to which there are no generally valid intellectual criteria." Professor Stanley Fish, a well-known academic scholar and political liberal, who recently retired as dean of the Chicago campus of the University of Illinois, wrote an article on this subject which appeared in the Chronicle of Higher Education titled, "Save the World on Your Own Time." He says, "Teachers should teach their subjects. They should not teach peace or war or freedom or diversity or uniformity or nationalism or anti-nationalism or any other agenda that might properly be taught by a political leader or a talk show host. Of course, they should teach about such subjects, something very different from urging them as commitments when they are part of the history or philosophy or literature or sociology that is being studied. The only advocacy that should go on in the classroom is the advocacy of what James Murphy has identified as the intellectual virtues, quote, thoroughness, perseverance, intellectual honesty, all of which are components of the cardinal academic virtue of being conscientious in the pursuit of truth. In other words, teachers should approach controversial issues that are relevant to the courses in which they have expertise as disinterested scholars. They should present their students with 2 or more sides to any controversial issue and not urge on them any particular side. They should teach them what the evidence is, how to assemble it, and how to construct an argument. After that, they should leave it to students to form their own conclusions. This has been the idea of the basic idea of a democratic education throughout history, but it is now under sustained and systematic attack from forces within our educational institutions themselves. The colonization of intellectual life by politics cannot help but degrade a liberal education. If I sound bitter, it is not because the universities have been politicized in a way that privileges left-wing activism. I would be equally unhappy to see conservatism promoted as a given in academic discourse. Many cultural and educational observers have decried this subversion of the Academy's unwritten constitution. The catalyst for all the hand-wringing of the past 2 decades was Chicago professor Alan Bloom's 1987 book, The Closing of the American Mind. In it, Bloom denounced the Academy for its indulgence of a viral political correctness that has infected the entire Western world of higher education, resulting in curricula whose animating theme is cultural self-hatred, a phenomenon unique in world history. Since Bloom began the trend of denunciation, the requiems have tumbled forth. I myself own an entire bookshelf of them, and a random glance at their titles tells the tale. Zero Tolerance, Humanism Betrayed, Brainwashed, The Betrayal of Intellect in Higher Education, Petrified Campus, Education's End, Why Our Colleges and Universities Have Given Up on the Meaning of Life, Ivory Tower Blues, and many more. Universities are diverse in all that touches race, ethnicity, and gender. What is lacking is intellectual diversity, virtually proscribed in the academic community. From their ivory towers, our leftist ecclesiastics rigorously monitor the 4 credos from which no dissent is permitted. The first is relativism, each to his own truth, except, of course, the truth of relativism, which is absolute. Feminism, post-colonialism, and multiculturalism. These are the 4 pillars on which the present arts agenda rests. To this effect, inscribed over the portals of the humanities and social science departments in most Canadian universities should be the words, "Abandon critical judgment, all ye who enter here." Abraham Lincoln said, "The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next."